Out on the wind-scoured flats of northern Patagonia, the ground can look empty at first glance. Low scrub grips the soil. Dust rides the breeze in thin sheets. The sky feels big enough to swallow the horizon. But under that quiet surface sits a library of deep time, written in sandstone and mudstone, stacked layer on layer by ancient rivers that once braided across this landscape. In those rocks, the past is not a story told in words. It is told in textures, in mineral stains, in the angle of a buried bone, and in the long patience required to notice what does not belong. Giganotosaurus enters science the way many great discoveries do, not with a trumpet blast, but with a careful eye. In the early 1990s, near the town of Villa El Chocón in Neuquén province, a fossil enthusiast named Ruben Dario Carolini spotted bones eroding from the ground. The finds drew the attention of professional paleontologists, and before long the site revealed something extraordinary: the remains of a massive predatory dinosaur, unlike anything previously described from the region. When researchers later published the formal description, the name they chose carried both scale and place in its meaning. Giganotosaurus, giant southern lizard, a title that anchored the animal to the southern continents and to the sheer magnitude suggested by its bones. Two scientists, Rodolfo Coria and Leonardo Salgado, led the work that brought the animal into the scientific record. And in the species name, Carolinii, they honored the person who first recognized that the rock face was giving up something rare. It was a reminder of how paleontology often moves forward, a partnership between the landscape, the sharp-eyed observers who walk it, and the careful analyses that follow in labs and museum collections. The bones themselves did not arrive as a complete skeleton laid out like a diagram. Fossils almost never do. What the team recovered was substantial, yet incomplete enough to reconstruct a powerful outline, enough to ask bigger questions, and enough to keep some answers just out of reach. That tension is part of what makes Giganotosaurus so compelling. It is one of the best-known giant predators from South America, and at the same time it remains a scientific puzzle in motion, refined as new methods and new comparisons sharpen our view. To understand what kind of animal this was, the first step is to understand its world. During the late Cretaceous, this region of what is now Argentina was shaped by river systems, floodplains, and seasonal shifts that laid down thick packages of sediment. Set aside the modern map entirely and think in terms of environments instead of borders. Broad channels carried sand. Floods spilled silt across flats. Vegetation clustered where water lingered, then thinned where dry seasons pressed in. Over time, those sediments hardened, preserving snapshots of ecosystems that once supported enormous plant eaters and the predators that followed them. Fossil beds like these are more than bone repositories. They are environmental records. The size and sorting of grains can tell you whether water moved fast or slow. Mud cracks can hint at drying cycles. Mineral chemistry can suggest changes in oxygen levels, shifts in groundwater, or the presence of ancient soils. When a giant predator turns up in this context, it is not just a trophy specimen. It becomes a data point inside a living system, a clue to how energy moved through a landscape, how prey species sustained themselves, and what kind of hunting pressure the largest carnivores could exert. Giganotosaurus belongs to a lineage of theropods called Carcharodontosaurids, a group whose name comes from teeth that evoke the serrated edge of a shark's. That detail matters, because teeth are not decorations. They are tools, and in predators, they are among the clearest windows into feeding strategy. The teeth associated with this family are typically blade-like, laterally compressed, with fine serrations that act like a biological saw. That design is excellent for slicing flesh, opening deep wounds, and stripping meat from bone. It suggests a predator built to cut and tear, with bites that functioned less like a crushing vice and more like a set of knives driven by powerful jaw muscles and a heavy skull. The skull itself is central to the Giganotosaurus story. In large theropods, the skull is both a weapon and a stress-bearing structure. Researchers study skull bones the way engineers study bridges, looking at buttresses, openings, thickness, and the ways different pieces interlock. In many giant predatory dinosaurs, the skull is a mosaic of bones that balance strength with weight savings. Openings reduce mass, reinforced areas channel force. The shape of the snout, the arrangement of fenestrae, and the connections around the jaw joint all shape how the head handled stress during feeding. But even here, the science is cautious. When parts of a skeleton are missing or incomplete, researchers do not fill gaps with wishful thinking. They fill them with comparison. They take measurements from preserved bones and compare them to closely related species with better-known anatomy. They build statistical models. They check scaling relationships, how certain dimensions tend to grow as body size increases in related animals. They run multiple reconstructions and examine how much the results vary. The outcome is not a single, perfect number. It is a range, with uncertainty baked in. That is why you will see different estimates for how long Giganotosaurus was and how much it weighed. Depending on the assumptions and the reference animals used, the estimates shift. Still, the overall picture is clear. This was an animal in the upper tier of predatory dinosaur size. Many reconstructions place it at roughly 40 to 43 feet in length, with a mass that could land in the several tons range. Those figures are best treated as informed approximations, not as a precise yardstick. They tell us it was enormous. They do not tell us we have measured it down to the last pound. When paleontologists talk about size, they are not trying to win a contest. They are trying to understand biology. Size influences speed, stamina, heat management, growth rate, and the kinds of prey an animal can realistically subdue. A predator of this scale requires a huge daily energy budget. It cannot thrive in a landscape that cannot feed it. So every estimate connects back to ecology. If the environment supported Giganotosaurus, it implies abundant, large-bodied herbivores and enough productive habitat to sustain them. In other words, the predator is evidence for the richness of its ecosystem, even when we have not found every species that lived beside it. The body plan suggested by the preserved bones fits what we expect from a top-tier theropod. Powerful hind limbs indicate an animal built for forward motion, with muscle attachments that speak to strength and stability. The long tail would have acted as a counterbalance, keeping the center of mass aligned during movement and turns. The forelimbs, as with many large theropods, were smaller relative to the rest of the body. Not useless, but not the primary tools for dispatching prey. In these animals, the head and jaws are the main interface with the world's hardest problems: capturing, killing, and consuming large, struggling animals. Even the feet matter. Theropod feet are built around weight-bearing toes, with claws that provide traction and grip. Trackways from related animals show how these predators moved, how they distributed weight, how their gait changed with speed, and how they navigated soft ground near river edges. While we cannot point to a single trackway and claim it belongs to Giganotosaurus with certainty, the broader evidence shows what kind of locomotion its anatomy was made for. Steady travel across long distances, the ability to accelerate when necessary, and the structural support to carry immense mass without collapsing under its own weight. The name Giganotosaurus is now familiar to many people, but in the field and in the lab, it remains anchored in specific bones, measured in millimeters, described with careful terminology, and compared again and again against the growing family tree of theropod dinosaurs. That family tree has changed over time. As new fossils have been discovered in South America and elsewhere, scientists have refined relationships, revised classifications, and updated what traits belong to which branches. Giganotosaurus sits among predators that, together, reveal something important about evolution during the Cretaceous. In the southern continents, giant carnivores evolved along a pathway distinct from the one that later produced the iconic tyrannosaurs of North America and Asia. That difference is not just trivia. It shapes how we think about predatory dominance across the globe. Different regions had different prey communities, different climates, and different evolutionary starting points. In Patagonia, the rise of massive suggests a world where slicing teeth and large, powerful skulls offered a successful solution to hunting big-bodied herbivores. It is a reminder that there was never only one way to be the top predator. Nature, given time and variation, repeatedly invents new versions of the same role. There is also a human story that follows the bones after they leave the ground. Fossils are stabilized, jacketed in plaster, transported with painstaking care, and prepared under microscopes where technicians remove rock grain by grain. Each step can reveal new details. A fracture that happened after burial. A surface texture that hints at muscle attachment. A subtle ridge that helps identify the bone's position in the body. In Argentina, specimens connected to this discovery have been displayed and studied in regional institutions, including Ernesto Bachmann Paleontological Museum, where the public can see how a few weathered bones became one of the most famous predators ever found in the southern hemisphere. What makes this first chapter of Giganotosaurus so powerful is that it captures science in action. The discovery does not hand us a complete animal. It hands us evidence. From that evidence, researchers build a working model, an enormous theropod predator, adapted for slicing bites, moving through river-cut floodplains, and occupying the apex of a Cretaceous ecosystem. The model is strong enough to teach us real biology and flexible enough to change when new data arrives. That is the core of paleontology, and it is the reason Giganotosaurus remains more than a headline about size. It is a case study in how the past is reconstructed carefully, rigorously, and always with room for the next bone to revise the story. The next question is the one every set of massive predator bones eventually leads to. How did it eat, and what did it hunt? With Giganotosaurus, the answer begins with mechanics. In large theropods, feeding is not just about jaw strength. It is about how force moves through the skull, how the neck supports that force, and how the teeth convert that force into damage. The hallmark of carcharodontosaurid predators is not a tooth built to crush like a hammer. It is a tooth built to slice like a blade. Those serrated edges are a biological cutting tool, designed to open flesh efficiently. The skull, long and robust, offers reach and leverage. The neck, thick with muscle attachments, becomes the engine that drives the head through a controlled arc. That combination points toward a feeding strategy centered on cutting and repeated wounding. A bite does not need to pulverize bone to be lethal. A deep, tearing bite that opens major blood vessels and destabilizes muscle groups can force a large animal into shock or collapse from blood loss. Once the prey is weakened, the predator can maintain pressure, return to the target, and feed with less risk of injury. Risk matters. Prey in this world was not small. South America's late Cretaceous ecosystems included immense plant eaters capable of defending themselves with sheer mass, powerful tails, and the ability to trample or strike. For a predator, a broken rib, a damaged jaw, or a fractured leg can mean death, because the ability to hunt is the ability to live. So, the safest strategy is often the one that creates damage, while minimizing the time spent in contact with a struggling animal. That is where the teeth and skull shape become more than anatomy. They become behavior, at least in outline. A long skull allows a predator to reach across a broad target area, biting into flanks, hips, and soft tissue while staying out of the most dangerous zones. Serrations help the tooth edge keep cutting as it moves through meat, and the neck, built for strength, can pull and twist, widening wounds and ripping tissue free. But behavior is always a careful inference. Paleontology cannot film the hunt. It must assemble the most likely explanation from the evidence that survives. Teeth tell you what kind of damage is efficient. Bone structure tells you what kinds of force a skull could tolerate. Muscle attachments hint at power and movement range, where patterns and tooth replacement rates can suggest how often teeth were lost or dulled in feeding. All of it fits together, not as a single, perfect answer, but as a consistent model. To place that model into a living landscape, the next step is to look at the herbivores. Giant predators do not exist in isolation. They are shaped by the animals they chase and by the terrain those animals move through. Floodplains and river margins create open corridors and bottlenecks. Soft ground near water can slow heavy prey. Seasonal drought can concentrate animals around, shrinking sources of drinking water. Each of those factors changes the odds of a successful hunt. On open ground, speed and endurance matter. In mixed terrain, patchy vegetation, riverbanks, uneven sediment stability matters. For a predator the size of Giganotosaurus, quick acceleration over short distances may be less important than steady, efficient travel and the ability to exploit moments of weakness. In many modern ecosystems, the largest carnivores spend most of their time walking, watching, and conserving energy. Because sprinting is expensive, a huge predator is an energy manager as much as it is a fighter. That brings up another question, often asked about giant theropods. Did they hunt alone or in groups? The honest scientific answer is that direct evidence for coordinated pack hunting is rare and difficult to prove. Multiple individuals found together can reflect many scenarios. A drought that killed animals near a water source, a flood that transported bodies into one place, or a single carcass that attracted multiple predators in a short window of time. Even when the fossils line up in ways that hint at social behavior, the step from found together to hunted together is a big one. Still, the ecology allows for possibilities. In a world with extremely large prey, there are advantages to tolerance and loose association, especially around kills. Predators do not need to behave like wolves to benefit from being near other predators of their own species. They may simply follow similar routes, respond to the same seasonal patterns, and converge on food opportunities. Sometimes, that convergence turns violent. Sometimes, it becomes a tense truce. Either way, it reflects the reality of a landscape where calories are valuable and injuries are costly. Feeding on a kill is its own drama. A carcass the size of a truck is a windfall, but it is also a magnet. Smaller carnivores arrive. Scavengers circle. Even other large predators may take interest. In modern systems, the largest carnivore at the carcass often sets the terms, not because it is fearless, but because its size and weaponry allow it to control space. A predator like Giganotosaurus, with a skull built to deliver wide, slashing bites, would have been able to defend a kill with intimidation and force. Yet, even the top predator can be pushed, especially when outnumbered or when the carcass is already stripped of the best meat. The anatomy also suggests an animal suited to processing flesh efficiently once feeding begins. Serrated teeth do not merely kill. They turn muscle into manageable strips. A strong neck and a large head allow powerful pulling motions, the kind that separate meat from bone without needing to crush through it. That pattern fits a predator that can feed quickly, taking in large quantities when food is available, then enduring long gaps between major meals. Now, to understand Giganotosaurus more fully, it helps to compare it to other famous giant carnivores, not to declare a winner, but to highlight different evolutionary solutions to the same problem: how to be enormous and eat animals nearly as large as you are. In the northern continents, later in the Cretaceous, tyrannosaurs evolved skulls built for deep, powerful biting and robust teeth that could withstand tremendous stress. In the southern continents, Carcharodontosaurids built a different toolkit, one that leans into slicing and repeated wounding. Both strategies can be successful, depending on prey, climate, and history. It is a reminder that the title apex predator does not describe a single blueprint. It describes a role that evolution can fill in multiple ways. If tyrannosaurs represent the heavy-duty, bone-stressing approach, then Giganotosaurus represents a predator, optimized for cutting performance, dangerous not only because it is big, but because it is specialized. Its jaws and teeth suggest efficiency at opening flesh, and its overall body plan suggests an animal built to travel, patrol, and strike when conditions are favorable. That specialization also raises the question of limits. A slicing bite is devastating, but it must still be delivered with precision. A predator built around cutting may rely more on repeated attacks and less on holding a struggling animal in place. That means the hunt is not a single moment. It is a sequence. Track, approach, engage, inflict damage, pull back, reassess, and repeat. The prey's response, panic, herd defense, sheer endurance becomes part of the equation. The landscape becomes part of the equation. Weather becomes part of the equation. And behind all of it sits physiology. A predator of this size needs oxygen delivery, muscle performance, and temperature control that can handle both exertion and long periods of rest. Dinosaurs were not modern mammals, but they were also not sluggish reptiles in the outdated sense. Many lines of evidence point to active metabolisms and growth patterns that supported energetic lifestyles. That does not mean constant sprinting. It means the capacity for sustained activity when it matters, paired with the instinct to conserve energy whenever possible. The fossil record also preserves hints about life history. Bone microstructure, growth rings, and tissue types can reveal whether an animal grew quickly when young, how growth slowed with maturity, and whether the individual experienced stress events that left marks in the bone. These are not dramatic details like teeth and claws, but they are the quiet fingerprints of survival. A season of scarce food can leave a trace. An injury that healed can leave a trace. An infection can leave a trace. Over time, paleontology has become as much about those subtle records as it is about the headline features. So what did it mean, day to day, for an ecosystem to have Giganotosaurus at the top? It meant that large herbivores lived under constant pressure, not necessarily chased every hour, but shaped by risk in the same way modern prey species are shaped by lions or wolves. They would have benefited from herd behavior, alertness, and migration patterns that reduced exposure. Juveniles and sick individuals would have been most vulnerable. River crossings and muddy ground would have been dangerous. Dense vegetation could offer cover, but also conceal predators. Open flats could offer visibility, but also fewer escape options when fatigue sets in. It also meant that carcasses were ecological events. A single large kill could feed multiple animals for days, depending on temperature, insect activity, and how quickly other scavengers arrived. Bones left behind would be gnawed, trampled, and scattered. Some would end up buried in flood sediments, starting the long journey toward fossilization. Most would vanish without a trace. The few that survived the geology would eventually become the fragments we find and interpret, trying to reconstruct that chain of events from mineralized leftovers. As scientists refine the story, they rely on more than bones. Three-dimensional scanning allows researchers to compare skull shapes precisely and test how different designs handle stress. Biomechanical modeling estimates how forces might move through bone during biting and tearing. Statistical scaling studies help narrow plausible mass ranges. Even the chemistry of the surrounding rock can inform the environment the animal lived in. But every method has limits. Models depend on assumptions. Muscles do not fossilize, and reconstructions of muscle size and placement must be inferred from attachment scars and comparisons with living animals. Soft tissue affects posture, balance, and movement. Skin, fat, and air sacs affect body mass distribution. These unknowns do not make the science weak, they make it careful. The goal is not certainty, where certainty is impossible. The goal is the strongest explanation the evidence can support. And that brings the story back to what makes Giganotosaurus more than a name. It is not just one of the biggest. It is a window into an entire southern world, where different predator lineages rose to power, where river systems built the fossil record grain by grain, and where evolution experimented with multiple ways to turn bone, muscle, and tooth into dominance. Today, whenever a new theropod fossil is described from South America, another skull fragment, another limb bone, another set of teeth, Giganotosaurus becomes part of a larger conversation. Each discovery can sharpen what traits are unique, what traits are shared, and how these predators diversified across time and geography. The picture grows richer, and sometimes it shifts in unexpected directions. What remains stable is the central reality written into the bones. This was a predator built for a world of giants. Its anatomy speaks of power without waste, of weaponry designed to cut, and of a life defined by energy, finding it, spending it, and surviving long enough to spend it again. In the rocks of Patagonia, that story is still being uncovered, one careful scrape of stone at a time, turning silence into evidence, and evidence into a living portrait of one of the most formidable hunters the southern continents ever produced.